about the basics of content marketing. Sorry, I was multitasking, getting my first polling question going. So we do want to make this as a interactive process as we possibly can. And yes, absolutely. So once this presentation is finished today, we will definitely share this with you, and looking forward to doing that. In any case, thank you for dropping by wherever you are at in your day. Want to pay the bills real quick. Thank you to iSynergy for sponsoring this webinar and being a year-long sponsor for DO Live Digital Marketing Interactive Design Conference that is presented by, that's right, iSynergy. If you can see me and you can see the screen, please do me a favor real quick. Raise your hand. That will give me some idea that we know. Emily, Amanda, yes. All right, we go ahead and put them down. Thank you for dropping by. So let's get it going. What's today's agenda look like? Today's agenda is we're going to talk about what is actually content marketing, building a framework, the ability to be able to tell a story, generating content ideas, editorial calendar, content distribution, and most important of all, where people I think end up missing the boat in the content conversation is on the conversion piece. So we're going to start with a little Seth Godin. Maybe you know this guy, maybe you don't. Has a fantastic blog written in typeset, 20 bestsellers on the New York Times list as a guy that has been in the marketing industry for a very long time. Talks about content marketing being the only type of marketing that's around or still something that you can do from a business perspective. Let's start with the definition. Content marketing, let's get very clear. I had an old timer on Facebook call me out and say, you know, you're just calling sales and marketing something new so you could sell something. And the reality is that content marketing isn't anything that's new. It's been around since, the beginning of time, when the first person decided to go and draw a picture on a wall in a cave to tell a story. And at the end of the day, we know that John Deere is an early pioneer, literally in the late 1800s, an example that we'll get into later in the webinar on their use of a content marketing strategy. But Content Marketing Institute out of Cleveland, Ohio, which draws 4,000 people from around the globe on an annual basis to their annual marketing conference and puts out great content to educate people, says that it's a strategic marketing approach that you create valuable, relevant content on a consistent basis. You're attracting an audience that's very defined and ultimately helps to drive profitability to a company. So that is what, by definition, they talk about what content marketing is. Founder of all that is Joe Pulizzi. A book that I highly recommend that all of you read is a book called Content Inc. Content Inc. is essentially what Joe has driven up out of the Content Marketing Institute and drives content marketing world. And effectively what the premise behind the Content Inc. model is this. It's very simple. This could be for an individual or this could be for a business. And it works really well in the B2B space, is that you're going to find an area that you have a ton of expertise and a ton of passion on. And basically, you're going to end up putting out content on a consistent basis in order to be able to build an audience. And as you build that audience, that's how you end up putting different products and solutions into place that will ultimately help lead to conversion. So that is the premise behind what you see from a content marketing perspective. Now, here's the deal with it. So first of all, the difficult thing about Joe's strategy is this in Content Inc. that he says it could take anywhere between a year to 2 years to end up literally being able to put out content on a consistent basis, becoming the authoritarian, the voice to not just your tribe, but to be a recognized leader in the arena of the content that you are producing. So whether you're a flooring company, a candy maker, a marketing company, if you're putting out content on a consistent basis and you're educating your audience, it's going to take time for you to be able to develop that voice, because obviously the world's a very noisy place, especially from an online perspective. The additional thing that happens that everybody starts out with these amazing intentions. I'm going to have a podcast. I'm going to have a blog. I'm going to do video as a part of our strategy. But unfortunately, what happens is a lot of people, a lot of organizations don't see the results that they would like to see quick enough. And I'm going to put out another polling question just to keep everybody on their toes. Is, in this conversation about content, what type of content are you most likely to consume in today's day and age? The other area, because obviously time, building an audience a year or two, being consistent with obviously that content, you've got not just to be an expert. Don't give up too soon. You got to be passionate about it, because what's going to happen is that you're going to gain a follower, you're going to lose a follower. You're going to gain somebody that subscribes to your email list, and then they're going to drop off. And then you're going to post a blog, and nobody's going to read the first one, maybe not even read the second one. But your voice, you're going to find your voice. You're going to get better at it. But you got to be passionate about just the product, about what you're talking about, because if you're not, then people are going to see right through that. And because of that, passion carries you through. This is another one that I find to be rather interesting. So when I put this slide together, I was just trying to tell you, like, be programmatic in your thought process, meaning that being consistent will help. We did the DOYO Live marketing show every day, every Friday at 11 a.m. for over a period of almost a year and a half to 2 years. And I kind of debunked the notion of programmatic, being consistent. But what programmatic means is that we know that there are certain things that happen at a certain time, but we're getting away from that. And I kind of lead on this one. So do you want to be programmatic? Well, we're being conditioned that everything that we have from a consumer perspective is pretty much on demand. Like, we go to our iPhone, we could buy something. We could go to Amazon, we could order something. We could go to Netflix, we could go to Hulu Plus, and we can stream services. And we can watch our favorite TV show at whatever time that we want to watch it. And if you look on the right there, old Cliff Clavin, so I'm kind of dating myself to a certain aspect, is, programmatic. The mail comes every day consistently at a certain time. And then also I realized that for a lot of people that are on this line today can still remember, the time slot of the week that Cheers, the 80s sitcom, obviously aired on. Like 8, 9 o'clock every Thursday night. So, there is something to programmatic. And the other thing that, even though we're moving to this world of consciousness of people talking about everything streaming and on demand, I have people that come up to me on a consistent basis that literally talk to me, and they say, yeah, your marketing show is like every Friday at like 11, 12 o'clock. So there is something to be said about obviously being consistent about that. If you want to ask questions, obviously throughout today's webinar, while we're on the topic, feel free to go ahead and do so. Jillian, thank you for dropping by from Chicago today. I really appreciate that. In any case, if you want to go ahead and post a question, obviously in the chat anytime. You can also chat with other attendees as well. And like I said, we've got polling questions. So first example that I have for all of you, and I would like to see a show of hands. And this is a really interesting case study and a really interesting example of a content marketing play. How many of you are either a backyard chicken farmer or know someone that is a backyard chicken farmer, like has a coop, looks for the eggs? Can you raise your hand, please? So, Rose, like, we have 50 people that registered for this webinar. I think we've got probably 20 people on the webinar, and we literally have like over half the hands that are going up. So there's the case in point is this. Number one, there's an audience. Number two, the web has now made it easier for us to basically find that tribe and that audience, even though cutting through the amount of content. There's 152 million blogs in the world today. Put your head around that. There obviously podcasts are becoming more and more prevalent, and there feels like there's a lot of them out there. But this guy obviously branded himself as the Chicken Whisperer, and he puts out content on a consistent basis. And he's developed. It started in his backyard. He would meet with his neighbors over a beer, and he would talk chickens. Like, he was like the Forrest Gump of chickens. He was like, you could do this with this recipe, and then when you're raising the chickens, here's what you have to look for, and here's what you do. And somebody was like, hey, why don't you start a blog? So he started his blog, and then it started to get readership because of the fact that there's so many people that are backyard chicken farmers that want that organic experience because it's healthier for them. They want to raise their own chickens. So then he branched out and he started a radio show. And as he grew this audience, he ended up, with these different content plays along the way. And as he did this, he then began to monetize it by selling advertising to his show. He ended up showing up at food trade shows on behalf of, companies that are in the chicken business. And so this is a real life example of how this obviously all works. So the challenging part from a content play and the content perspective, the first thing that you're going to establish is like, what type of content do I want to develop? What are people consuming? We just had a polling question of, what type of content do you read? And it's kind of all over the board. It's very fractured at this point. Not one arena is dominating blog, vlog, podcast. People are digesting information in a lot of different ways. And the challenging part is obviously once you go into the content world and the content play, you have to obviously, again, produce content on a consistent basis. But that's difficult. We're all time strapped. The bandwidth for an organization and is difficult. And so creating a pillar piece of content is a really, really important piece when you start down that path. Developing it that we have something that's called a buyer's journey, so the pathway that people are taking to making their purchasing decisions to come to you. And it's also buyer's persona. So what's my persona? Male, female, income, family. Do I listen to podcasts? And trying to develop content that finds obviously your audience. And so my recommendation when it comes to this is in order to be able to scale your plan and produce content is to try to come up with one really kick butt piece of content on a consistent basis and then reuse that in a lot of different arenas. So if, for instance, this webinar for us is a pillar piece of content, and I only have to create this one time, obviously through this webinar. And then once this webinar is done, I'm going to essentially take this piece of content and I'm going to put it on our blog, put it in our email, use it in social media, possibly turn it into an ebook. So we're recording this event. We'll make it available on demand. We'll take this content, we'll actually use an online service called SpeechPad. And SpeechPad, what it does is it basically transcribes any sort of recorded word. It's a transcription service online. And we'll take that, we'll transcribe it. And then from that, we'll decide, is this a blog post or is this an ebook download? So you want to get the most, obviously, out of your content as you possibly can. I'm going to launch our third poll. And I just want to make sure that, let's do this. Before we talk about what type of content, I'd love to find out whether or not your business has a content marketing strategy. So there's so many different types of content that are obviously out there. What do you want to produce? Joe Felici says get very narrow with that, meaning that you don't want to spread yourself out across the board and try and do video, written blog, a podcast, and all those things. But if you can create that pillar content and then repurpose it, there's all these awesome opportunities from a distribution perspective that you could repurpose this content. We've got, obviously, the SEO factor is very important, search engine optimization from a web perspective. You've got email. Number one converting factor for anything that we do at DOYO Live, 80% of that conversion and anybody that we work with comes from our email, growing our email list and then leveraging email. Social media does a great job with distribution. It doesn't do a great job with our conversion factor, but it creates a groundswell of engagement. It offers us an awesome opportunity to create awareness. Direct referral links, social media, content marketing obviously is a part of the strategy. So these are all different places that you can leverage from that perspective. And then it's that time of year. Everybody wants to know, like, what does repurpose mean, right? So no other better way to provide you an example of the repurpose than obviously leftovers from Thanksgiving. Like, you repurpose that meal and you don't just take the turkey and eat the turkey again, like you make your turkey sandwiches. I've got an awesome, by the way, not to digress too much, but I have an awesome turkey BLT with avocado and bacon recipe that if anybody wants to cough that one, I'll try and put that one in the follow-up. But in any case, you repurpose Thanksgiving dinner. It's the same thing that you should be doing with your content. Again, I'm really harping on this piece with the whole filler content, create it, and repurpose that as much as you possibly can. Our poll, do you currently have a content marketing strategy in your business? 75% of you said yes. 25% of you said no, which is very interesting. So the next piece of polling question that I have to keep you, didn't know that there was going to be this many quizzes today, did you? So I'm very curious to know as to as also, what is your most effective content play? And I've only given you a chance to have one question. So one of the things that I like to say, and it sounds really cool, makes me sound really smart, is that the velocity of which digital marketing changes is such a rapid pace that it's difficult to keep up with it on a day-to-day basis. And that sounds really cool. And that is a fact. I mean, that's the reality, is like whatever was working today on Facebook or in your digital strategy, all these platforms are subject to change, and they change with platform updates and changes to, algorithms and changes to the way that people take in that information. But the one thing that's always stayed consistent is your ability to get around a campfire and tell a story, and tell a unique story about your brand. We all now have this ability, for better or for worse, to get heard because of the fact that the barrier to entry to having a TV show is now Facebook Live. The barrier to entry to having your own radio show is a podcast. To be able to produce a written form of content and not rely upon the newspaper on a daily basis, it's all out there for you from your perspective to be able to tell your story. But what a lot of times what happens is that we get into features and we get into benefits and not the why. Like, why do people buy your product? The who, what, when, and where. So to give you an example of that, storytelling by far is still an incredibly important piece of the marketing aspect of your business, not just the nuts and bolts. So I can tell you that, hey, here's the deal. I found the marketing conference that takes place in Youngstown, Ohio. We're heading into our 4th year. We've managed to grow, just about sell out our venue every year. And it's become obviously a really nice community event that helps people grow their businesses. And that's a somewhat of an interesting story, but that's not very, like, at the end of the day, to me, what's much more interesting is the way that you end up telling the story. And that's, for me, DOYO Live started with this Instagram selfie back in 2014 when I was out speaking and attending conferences on a national level. And I gone to the Mayo Clinic Social Media Healthcare Summit to speak about social media marketing in healthcare. Sat in the basement of a Marriott hotel for 2 days learning about social media strategy, digital marketing in healthcare. There's not a lot in all 4 directions when you look at Rochester, Minnesota. Obviously, the Mayo Clinic is a world-class healthcare institution. So I had played college basketball, and I made a promise to myself that when I was done, I would no longer take Greyhound buses, because we had traveled on those buses for 4 years. It was almost like a minor league baseball team. So we had 30 games a year. At least 15 to 20 of those games were away games. And I sat on buses anywhere between an hour to 5 hours a ride down and 5 hours back. So I made a promise to myself I'd never go on another Greyhound bus. So I go to the airport, and a delay leads to a cancellation that leads them putting me on a Greyhound bus, which was a beautiful ride through cow country, up to St. Paul, Minneapolis, Twin Cities, put me on a flight, and I got home that night at 2 o'clock in the morning. And the most important thing to me is being around and being with my family. And I don't like, when I travel, having to be away from being away from family. So I woke up the next day with enough motivation about thinking about the fact that why can't we do a marketing conference in Youngstown, Ohio? So then I put on my smart guy marketing hat, looked in LinkedIn, and found that we had 300,000 people within a 65-mile radius of Youngstown, Ohio. No regional day marketing conference. Those people on LinkedIn had a marketing in their title. We're not talking about the business owners and the sales professionals as well, and the designers. So I started to look at our resources, and I started to think to myself, you know what, this is a real opportunity. Like, there's something here that could be said that we can do this. And then what I uncovered along the way is that we have a tremendous amount of talent in our local community that's in marketing, that speak at some of the largest conferences in the country on a consistent basis. Why not give them the platform to do it here? So we drummed up a conference called DOYO Live that is dedicated towards the ongoing professional development of marketing, business, sales, and design professionals. Now, I know that second version is a little bit long-winded, but at the end of the day, to me, it's a much more interesting story about how it came about, why it filled the void, in those things along the way. So I recommend that you don't ever lose that focus. So when it comes to thinking up content, that's another arena that is a very interesting idea. And as I go down that path for just 1 second here, if you could in the chat, I'm going to post what's your most effective content play, and we had a bunch of different answers across the board. If you could make a prediction into the chat of what you think is almost like the Price is Right. What do you think most of our people on today's webinar said their most effective piece of content is? Blog, email, webinar, podcast, social media, video, vlog, ebook, other. If you had to make a prediction, what do you think that answer looks like? I'm going to end the poll. And we've got a couple of people in the chat that said social media. Social media. Interesting. So a lot of people are obviously all in. Here's what the results look like. So, and obviously this isn't, we've got 20 people on the webinar, so not everybody participated, but 50% said social media, 21% said blog, video as a component, and it probably is a little bit of a confusing question. Maybe could have been answered a little bit better. That obviously a lot of this content is supported and distributed through a social media channel. So the idea of generating ideas is like to get on the horse and ride it backwards. Look in the rears to find where you're going. That's like, I feel like a Greek philosopher on a Friday. So you got to think backwards. You got to think about the problems in your industry that you are solving for. So if you're going to educate your audience on your industry, then you have to go and you have to reverse engineer the entire process of, okay, if I'm a pizza shop, I'm actually going to be willing to educate people on how to make pizza. And the reason I'd be willing to do that is because I can't expect my best customers to come to my pizza shop every day. So maybe if I'm willing to educate them on how to make pizza, then I become their favorite pizza store because I build up some equity in that. So the question then becomes this: what are all the steps in the process that come along with making a pizza? Like, what's the best type of dough to use? So there's a podcast, there's a blog, right? And you're going to say, here's the best, the 5 best ways to make pizza dough crust. And then you can reverse engineer that across sauce, across the whole plan, across all those different things. Frequently asked questions that your customers ask you on a day-to-day basis. I can guarantee you that those will be questions that you get asked at scale across the board. Customer service. If for those businesses that are bigger that have a customer service department, they interact a lot more than likely with your customers on a consistent basis. That's a great resource for you within your business to be able to go out and ask that department and say, hey, I need a list of all the questions. A lot of organizations have an inbound CRM for their customer support that actually track those ongoing questions. Get that report. Develop your content around that. That's going to obviously help educate your audience, potentially minimize the amount of people that are calling your organization into the service organization. Carry a notebook. Chris Rock, the comedian, carried a notebook around for 2 decades, and every time he thought something was funny, he'd write something down in that notebook to develop his jokes. I do that on a consistent basis. I don't carry a notebook anymore. I carry a phone, and I take a picture when I see something, then therefore I can kind of go back to it. Reddit, the front page of the internet. So these are just different ways that you can generate content that's relevant to you, to your industry. Next thing that you have to do that's really an important aspect, and on the right-hand side, this is as basic as we get to as complicated as we get. So I like to use Google Drive and Google Docs because it edits real time. If you have a team or a team of people, it gives you the opportunity to be able to put together an editorial calendar. So typically what I would do is I just drag and drop my calendar on the first column. I said type, that actually should probably be medium, but type, is it a blog? Is it a newsletter? Is it a promo? What is the content? So in this particular instance, I was working on including speakers and sponsors into our email newsletter. So this actually was pretty specific to the plan that we were developing, but I a lot of times will develop this and put distribution. So we'll say, social media. And I know a lot of organizations that work off this, from that perspective. There's definitely software that's out there that has been ever evolving. OneNote, Slack, Asana. So these are just different platforms that you can use. I think that adds an additional layer, in my opinion. If you're working on a team, I think it is important. And if it's important enough, I like to keep mine very simple, and cost effective as well. And I don't want to introduce a new piece of technology. You could get into marketing automation platforms like HubSpot or Marketo. They will actually have also editorial and planning calendars within those platforms as well. Questions, comments, concerns, please make sure that you go ahead and put those into the chat. There's also the Q&A feature as well that you can go ahead and ask questions. I think we only have one polling question left, so you're able to kind of take a quick breather on our quizzes for the day there. The next is content distribution. There are just a ton of options that are out there today for you to be able to distribute content. So once you've created the content, this is basically called the hub and spoke model of Web 2.0 marketing. And you put your website at the center of that equation. And basically, the idea is that you want to be able to self-publish, and all of your content either goes to your email list first, VIP content, exclusive offers. That should maybe resonate or sound a little bit familiar. And you self-publish all of your content to your website first, and then from there you can distribute it out. I have a wavered back and forth off of this model. I still feel like this model is the model, right? But in the same note, I am not as crazy about it as I've been in the past. Matter of fact, I've done webinars on how Web 2.0 marketing is dead, which was a little bit bullish on my part. So here's what I know, is that in this arena, I've become very comfortable with people digesting my content on the platform that they choose, and whether or not they want to click the link or they just want to, on their own, come to my website, I'm very cool with that. I'm also cool with them just basically living in that platform. So if you're an iTunes podcast person and you want to listen to my podcast on iTunes, which actually is a bad example because we're on SoundCloud, and that's where you want the content to be, then fine, listen to it on SoundCloud. You don't necessarily have to come over to my website. Hopefully, eventually, you get interested enough in DOYO Live that you would then obviously come, to our website on your own. Same thing with webinar. Blog is obviously going to be likely on our website. But one of the things I want to point out to you is that you spend so much time trying to build up the amount of web traffic that's obviously coming to your website, because ultimately at the end of the day, again, I feel that 80%, and statistically I could back that up, that 80% of our conversion comes from our email list and our email campaign. So the more people that obviously come to our website, that subscribe to our newsletter, gives us a better opportunity to convert those people obviously into coming to conferences and webinars and workshops and things of that nature. So that is obviously valuable. But when you create, for instance, if you create content for a blog, there's absolutely, positively a tremendous value in taking advantage of sites like Medium, LinkedIn Publishing that already have this huge built-in audience that are just looking for content that's relevant to what is the topic, absolutely you should take advantage and repurpose that blog over to a site like Medium or LinkedIn. You copy and paste it, and in 5 minutes you're pretty much done with it. And so there is value in that. Same thing that we can say with your blog. If you're establishing a blog, you're going to end up embedding it into your website, right? So you're either going to do a vlog, you're going to record that video, you're going to put it on YouTube. If you're going to embed that blog into your website, then you obviously should go around to these other mechanisms and share that content in those other arenas. Hopefully that makes sense. Next, let's talk about conversion. Don't just create content to create content to create conversion. And there are way too many, and I hope this isn't come as a critique, and I'm guilty of it as anybody, is that there's way too many people throwing right hooks and trying to knock people out before they even take them on the first date and nurture them along the way through their sales funnel. So a piece of content of value might be the blog, might be the podcast, completely free. Just come listen to it. And that's what we're trying to accomplish, is win you over with some sort of delighted content. And these funnels have always either been vertical or horizontal. And people come in at the top of the funnel, they visit, they like something, they hear something, they say, this is interesting, and I want to digest this content. Maybe I'm going to take the next step. I'm going to subscribe to the podcast, or I'm going to subscribe to the blog. And you kind of go along this pathway to then, you do soft things like just nurturing and educating people along the way. Maybe you're entertaining them and you start to engage them, and then eventually there's a promotion that comes into place. So a form of that is this webinar, for instance. Like, we're putting out the content on a consistent basis. We're educating our audience with our blog. We share that through social media. Hopefully we put some posts out there that are entertaining you from time to time. And then eventually we have a little bit more of a down the funnel conversation and say, hey, look, I'm going to put on a webinar for you. I want you to subscribe. I want you to register, and I want an hour of your time. Hopefully I'm going to present some valuable information to you. And we effectively, obviously, are in that process. Eventually, hopefully I've given up enough free content that's valuable in nature that eventually you want to convert into potentially coming to a workshop or potentially coming to an annual marketing conference. And so that's essentially what you're looking at from a conversion perspective. The problem with traditional funnels is this, and you'll hear things like click funnels is a huge thing on the internet. The problem with linear funnels is that there are no funnels that are linear anymore. People are going to see a social media post. They might come to your website. They might get a blog. They might get a word of mouth. They might get an email. Then they come back to social media. And then they come back and they see that maybe there's some paid advertising. And then 8, 9, 10 touch points later, they're like, where did this whole conversation start? And likely it started in the omni channel. So funnels are becoming more circular, that are encapsulating both sales, marketing, service, all wrapped around what ends up becoming the customer experience. And so it's very difficult, I think, from my perspective, to, everybody wants the magic bullet. The magic bullet of marketing in lead gen and closure and conversion is this. I did X, and this X thing ended up converting that individual into a customer. And I can tell you that I'm very shocked, if any at all, that there's not 5, 7, 8 touch points with each buying decision that you make, unless it's very low transactional dollar amounts. I mean, if you think about it right now, if you were going to buy a TV, you would end up going to type into Google. 90% of you would type into Google, at least that's what our statistics tell us. 90% of you go to Google, you type in TV, then the next thing you know, you're looking at TVs online, you read a review, the third lens becomes your neighbor, then maybe you go out to the store, you look at them in person because of the fact that you want to see and still touch stuff, And then you might come home again to Amazon and say, where can I get the best deal, obviously, on that TV? Does that sound familiar? Like, that's a process, right? So along that path, you tell me which was the ultimate deciding factor as to helped you to make that purchase. You could be an electronic healthcare records vendor, and that person that's in that organization that's making that buying decision is likely a committee. And on that committee, there's multiple people that probably sat in a webinar, read a case study, they visited your website, they got references, they had meetings with salespeople. What converted it? Like, where do you want to put that credence? So the answer is you got to be doing all of it in some capacity, giving people an opportunity to be able to interact with your brand at every stage along the way. So does content marketing work? I believe it does. I will give you some examples of who is doing what on content marketing, and some of these are for the individual brand, and some of these are B2B examples as well. So this works business to consumer, business to business, or even people that are just establishing themselves as their own brand. Pittsburgh Dad. Raise your hand if you've heard of the Pittsburgh Dad. I'd love to see how many people out there. Yes. He's amazingly funny, very typical, very stereotypical Western PA dude, just talking about the Steelers and Iron City beer and how he's basically built up this huge following. You can see here that these views on YouTube are just ridiculous, right? 120,000 views for a video posted on November 6th. And he's now monetizing it with T-shirts, appearances. You can actually get placement onto Pittsburgh Dad's YouTube video. So there's all different ways that he's obviously built up this audience over the course of time and producing content on a consistent basis. It's entertaining, it's funny, it's light. This is interesting. I don't know why, like, it takes me a while. I'm an early adopter on a lot of things, but I'm slow to come around on others. And I don't know why the Joe Rogan experience to me is one that I'm slow with, but I've talked to so many people recently. How many of you are listening to Joe Rogan's podcast? Obviously a very adult-like content, but I think it was when I started watching a couple of his Netflix comedy specials that got me back on the Joe Rogan tip. And what's interesting is this. Joe Rogan started a podcast just to screw around and have this great conversation, long format. Sometimes it's like an hour, 2 hours long, and just talks about different stuff and has these very interesting takes. But he's built up this massive following on his podcast, which he's always gone out and done stand-up comedy, but just guess what? Now that conversion factor, Joe Rogan's coming to your city, a whole new audience, a whole new group of people that are following that content, that are now buying tickets to go out and see him in his live performances, watching his Netflix special. So that's been his content play. I know, if you're gonna boo, I hear the inaudible groans, and nobody likes to want to have this conversation. And this is not a political conversation, please trust me. I would not be that crazy to jump into the political arena and have that conversation with such a polarizing figure. But Winston Churchill did it. Winston Churchill was a radio person and built up that massive following. Donald Trump for 10 years was on The Apprentice, was accumulated 80 to 100 million viewers by the time it was all said and done. That's an extremely large content play. And then all of a sudden you flip the switch and you run to lead the free world. Well, guess what? And if anybody's confused of how we got to where we are and how this all happened, you have to look at that 10 years of basically entering people's homes with the show The Apprentice. Now, whether that was by design or not, I have no idea. But the fact of the matter is this, is that it built a huge audience and it gave him the opportunities to do what he did. B2B case studies. Our own local regional chamber of commerce. They do a really nice job with their Take 5 video where they go out and they highlight a couple businesses in the community that are obviously a part of the regional chamber to tell you about those businesses. I think it's a stellar idea, and not just from that perspective, but obviously talking about this. And they also put out a print publication as well. I'm going to do the old toot the old horn routine here. So how DO Live is built from a content marketing play is this, is that for 3 years in my consulting business, I would get together with people for coffee and talk to them about marketing strategy. They didn't have a big enough budget to sign on with me. Not that I was like charging, crazy expensive rates. At least I didn't think so. But they didn't want to take that next step. So what I did when I launched the conference, I started to put out content, and I didn't have a year or two to wait, like Joe Polizzi says. Like, it takes a year or two to build an audience. I didn't have that time. I had coming in 2016, and then we had a date. And so I went back to all those people that I had an audience with, that I had built up some trust with, and I put content together, email, and it reached out to those people individually, one-on-one. Hi, I remember when we met for coffee, you had this, big interest in wanting to develop, a marketing strategy for your business. Well, here's a great opportunity. I'm putting together a marketing conference that has a bunch of experts in your own city, and I would love for you to come. And here's a promo code. And so over the years, what we did is that we took that initial step. We churned out blog content in a written format 3 days a week, and then we evolved that into a video strategy with our Facebook Lives. And people are like, whoa, that was easy. I can tell you that just because we have a marketing and business owner audience, there's still people today that don't know that DO Live exists. There's still the majority that are here on this webinar that if I asked you to pronounce the name, you'd call it the DOYO, the DOYO. So that never ceases to amaze us. And I can tell you also as well, I remember exactly the first time that I did a webinar. It was on LinkedIn and social selling back literally 5 years ago. I had one person on that webinar, me. That was the only person that showed up for that webinar. Now we do webinars. We'll get 50 people to register, sometimes 100. We'll get 20 to 30 people to show up. So it takes time, like we said earlier, but we put out the content on a consistent basis to build the audience. And then what happens is that we invite you back, obviously, to come to workshops, and this in the conference. This also led us down the path of launching a print publication, and this is how we essentially have monetized the platform. So people buy tickets to DO Live. We have sponsors. We have year-long sponsors, and we have traditional sponsorships. And now on the bottom right-hand corner, because we had this audience and we become a trusted resource from a marketing perspective, we launched a print publication that's basically native advertising in the ICONs of Youngstown publication that includes print, digital, and events-driven activities. And I was able to leverage the audience in a good way, and bring value out to people in order to be able to accomplish that. So yes, so we answered that question. If you have a question, definitely put that in the chat, or put it in the Q&A, and I'll make sure that we get to it. Here's another organization that is, yes, in this presentation, I think I said this once, is going to be available on demand. We're coming down actually to the end of the webinar, so I want to make sure that we get through everything we want to get through. Viisi does a great job with their blog. It's not necessarily, it's a construction company. They tell stories about their leadership and their ownership. And the other example that I wanted to give you, and actually since we're coming down to the end, I've got another, so this is the post-webinar, and I'm going to launch this poll. There are 2 questions that are associated with this poll. So if you can, please go ahead and answer the questions. I'm going to get into John Deere. So John Deere launched a publication called The Furrow back in 1897 to educate farmers on farming. Not an advertisement, just educate educate farmers on farming. And what's really interesting about it is that there's only been a couple ads that have ever, over this couple 100-year period of this publication. And not only that, do they have this furrow, so they're educating their audience, right? Farmers. Most of rural America, by the way, like I attended this event at a Chamber of Commerce, and where like they were talking about how rural America still doesn't have access to high speed or just even Wi-Fi or internet services in general. you know, like Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is a prime example. You've got Pittsburgh, you've got Philadelphia, and all that space in between. But yet, still to this day, John Deere figured out how that content strategy is going to make sense for them then and now. And that's, they produced this print publication. They've also got 7 other publications that they essentially are producing on a consistent basis. So it's a very interesting play. They have the DIY steps on how you can fix a tractor. Like, they're going to educate you on that, how to make maintenance easy. So you can see here that this doesn't just play in the B2B, or I'm sorry, business, the brand, the individual. I'm going to develop a massive following. Great, go do it. I'm a business to business. I'm going to develop, you know, some form of content that I'm educating my audience on. Great, it will work. And then there's the B2C play as well. And I will tell you that the other thing is this, is that as we get into questions here at the end, I can tell you that we have done a webinar actually on the base of utilizing webinars as the basis of your content marketing strategy. And the reason is this, is that I believe that you should have content with a purpose. Don't just create content to create content for content's sake. And honestly, like, who in their business today, raise your hand if you think that you can go a year to 2 years of building an audience before you really start to see any sort of conversion out of that audience. If you can do that, hire me as your content marketing strategist and consultant today, because I would love to work with you. Because nobody has that patience and nobody has that budget. But you can create content strategy that's starting today that can produce results immediately. And a lot of times that's content with a purpose. That's a webinar strategy that basically you do exactly what we're doing here. And leading into that webinar, you create a couple pieces of content, maybe a blog that educates your audience. The call to action is obviously to register for that webinar. You're disseminating that content out through your social media channels. And those people that end up registering for the webinar end up entering into your nurturing cycle, and then obviously giving you an opportunity then to record this content, repurpose it, and you leverage it as that pillar piece of content. I want to thank everybody for dropping by today. It's amazing. We got 20 people on. One of you dropped. 19 of you are still here. We are recording this webinar, so you know that we'll get this out to you. I got 2 things for you. Number 1, Digital Marketing Interactive Design Conference coming back next October 2019. We will have a full list of speakers. That call for speakers is actually out. So if you want to talk and you want to drop some knowledge bombs on us, October 17th and 18th, that's your Huckleberry. It's a 2-day conference event and deep dive workshops. We have readjusted the price point to a $75 ticket all in, and then that early bird will end, I think, on March 31st. So you've got time. When you purchase that ticket, you will also get access to the speaker library from 2018. So a lot of value there. The other thing that we've got going on is that I am actually going to do a half-day workshop on the beginner's guide to applying content marketing in your business. There's a workshop with an actual work booklet. You could sign up for one of those, that workshop. It's $25. You get lunch as well. If you want to, you could actually sign up for 4 workshops that we have that will take place on a quarterly basis. That is also up on Eventbrite right now. The next workshop would be in March on social Facebook marketing and Facebook advertising. In June, I believe we're going to do another social media one, and then we'll do the 4th one at the conference. That $100 gets you 4 deep dive workshops throughout the year. It gets you a ticket to DOYO Live, and it gets you access to that video as well. So just trying to bring as much bring as much value as I possibly can to all of you. I got time for questions. Thank you, Mark, for dropping by. I appreciate the kind words. I have questions, if you have any questions, I'd love to stay on and answer any of those questions. We got 5 minutes left, hour-long webinar. If you got any recommendations, put them in the chat. Go ahead and ask a question. I see that some of you are dropping by, so I wanted to thank you again for dropping by today. Very much appreciate you making time out of your day. What made you choose a Friday? That is actually a very interesting question. So I have produced, either working directly for a company or my own or being contracted out, I've probably produced at least 70 webinars or more in my career, anywhere from one person to 1,000 people being on those webinars. And I have seen everything from lightning hit a building that blanked out the webinar on a very technical one, and I was sitting in my house or sitting in my office in Youngstown, Ohio. They were in Burlington, Vermont. We have done webinars where we've run them back to back, so an AM and a PM, because I was in a company that had East Coast and West Coast time differentiation. And I have always believed that Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays are the absolute best days to do webinars. Bookends of the week are something that we've always tried to stay away from. And then just, you know what, just trying something new, like testing the waters. Like what does a Friday webinar look like? Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, a lot of people are into their work day. They're doing client work. They're meeting with people. Businesses a lot of times are in meetings. Salespeople are out in the field. So I thought Friday was, a lot of times an office day. It's a little bit more relaxed. So let's give Friday a go. And, I can go back and I can kind of look at what the other days of the week have looked like against the content that we've had and the time frame that we've had that, and kind of will make some decisions. But we had a really good, I had a really good registration rate of about 50 people signed up for this webinar, which is pretty respectable, and about 20 people showed. So we usually get a rule of about 50% participation. So those numbers held pretty good. So I think that Friday works. Give me an answer in the chat what you think about the Friday webinar. I'd love to hear your feedback on that. What other questions do you have? Any sort of content questions? Social media? What's working for me? What's not working? So you mentioned that Web 2.0 is dying. Blog-centric is dying. Where is it going? So here's where I was for about 18 months, and I still kind of believe this, is that Web 2.0 is this communal sharing, hub and spoke model that's been around for a decade, and I feel like it's a little bit long in the tooth. And what I mean by that is this, is that as a digital marketing person, you end up we did a disservice when we recognized the moment that we can track clicks and click-throughs. We started to put more emphasis on the click and the click-through than the conversion and the outcome. And we were able to go out and we're going to say, look, it's working. And what I thought that Web 2.0 does is it helps to create a lot of ADD of the web. So self-serving, yes, I'm going to educate you, but I'm going to educate you on my terms, and I want you to come back to my website. So click this link here and come fill out this form and come do this, and we'll exchange currency, your email address, for my content. And I just feel like everybody's doing it. It's been around for a long while. It's like, I'm on LinkedIn. I would just love to read your article on LinkedIn and not have 50 tabs open by the time I'm done opening your link, because I thought it was interesting. So I thought to myself, let me do this. If you want to digest my content on the Facebook, fine, live on Facebook. Now, one thing that Joe Polizzi preaches with content marketing is that you never want to build a house on rented space, because A, it's going to change, and B, it's going to go away. And they say, put so much emphasis on your email list. The other problem with the email list is this: spam filters, they block, people unsubscribe, people change jobs. So it's not an end all either. So I just said, look, you want to read my content on Medium, read it on Medium. If you want to read my content on LinkedIn, read it on LinkedIn. If you want to read it on Facebook, read it on Facebook. Wherever you're comfortable, I'm going to come to you. You don't necessarily have to come to me. And what happened when we did that is that we had statistics go up across the board from all the key performance indicators. So the amount of visits that we got from our website grew significantly. The amount of time people were spending on our website grew significantly. The amount of page views that we got, people were going deeper into our website. And then the most important factor of all in our email list was growing as well as a result of that. And not only that, probably the biggest area of measurement and the most important area of measurement is that our conference went from 200 people in year one and sold out the venue to 260 people in year two to 300 people in year three. And our sponsorships went from 7 to 15 to 20 people or 20 businesses that sponsored. So it was all heading in the right direction. And all those things were pointing in that direction, leveraging that type of strategy. Now, you can't get away from it 100%. So that's where I think, and that's the strategy that we've deployed for about the past 2 years. The other thing I'll tell you about a blog is this, is that blogs have a tremendous amount of value to your organization and to your content strategy because of the fact that there's an inherent value to search engine optimization. We know that the more you update your website with relevant content, keywords to your industry, people sharing it, engaging with it, all those factors are a very important place when it comes to search engine optimization. On top of the fact that you're putting out content that could be valuable and educate your audience. But also the way that people are digesting blogs are that they, at least you see like a blog, and if there's audio to it, people will hit play on the video. They'll go down and read the subtitles or the H1, the H2 titles, and they'll skim it and scan it. And then they'll open up another tab. And if there's something that was interesting to them, they'll come back to that. I still digest a lot of blog content. And the reason I do, more so than video and podcast, is that the problem with video and podcast is that I can't skim it and I can't scan it. And that's a big problem for me. I don't have time to sit around and try and get the valuable nuggets out of a 5, 10, 20-minute podcast when I can just simply scan down or summarize through a written blog, read the headings, and then go from there. So what's really interesting is that it is counterintuitive to what I think a lot of people believe. And maybe one of the things that I left out is that, look, so selfishly, I do want you to come to my website, right? I want you to come to my website. I want you to subscribe to my email list. I think it's vitally important from an awareness perspective and from a marketing perspective, the conversion perspective, that you put content out there on all these different channels. The difference was that we were putting less emphasis on you clicking on a link to come to my website, and your investment was this. Wow, this DOYO Live thing is pretty cool. Let me go Google it, or let me type in the website and let me go there on my terms. And with the direct type of search like that happening, then there's more of a commitment from you than simply clicking a link with clickbait. And that's the way that I looked at it. And I still look at that from that perspective. Now, here's the interesting thing is that, I do consult businesses on their content marketing strategy. And I'm my own test kitchen. I do it in my own business because I believe in it. It's very difficult for me to get anybody else, because it works for us. It may not work for you, but I get more business. Like sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. I find the businesses I consult with, it's difficult for them to buy into this strategy because they don't have necessarily the patience that I do in my own business. Like, I know right now that it's valuable to be building an audience on Facebook Live because of the fact that there's still not this huge mass adoption of people that are dedicated towards doing Facebook Live as a strategy. And it reminds me of when social media started back in 2007 and all the businesses were like, I don't really think that Facebook is going to take off. And they waited to build an audience. And then 5 years later, they're like, I wish I would have built my audience. And so I look at that with like Facebook Live now, is that I'm willing to sow those seeds to build the audience now on Facebook Live, that maybe within a year, 2 years, or 5 years, that I'm maybe going to be reaping those benefits down the road. And I also think the same with this type of strategy, is that I'm reaping a deeper commitment from you as a community, as a tribe, by having you come to my website through that mechanism. Now, I know you're going to go out to Facebook, you're going to go out to LinkedIn, and you're going to see something there that says, oh, click here to go to DOYO Live. It's not going to be 100% of the time. Nothing is. And I think our goal was to try to get to, maybe a 70-30 split, maybe a 60-40 split, where we don't have links to where we have links as a part of that process. So anyway, listen, I'm willing to hang out and talk marketing, talk whatever you want to talk about. If you put a question in the chat, I'll be glad to answer it for you. We are at the top of the hour. We're actually past the hour, but like I said, I'm willing to sit around and ask. You have any more questions? You're still on. If you find this to be valuable, go ahead and put a question in either the chat and or into the Q&A. Got to run. Yes. Everybody have a great, safe weekend. If you're in Youngstown, you woke up to a lovely blanket of snow that's covering a lovely blanket of leaves right now. So I think we call that the nature's cake. That's what we baked this morning. So I have a great, safe weekend. All of you have a wonderful, thankful, happy Thanksgiving. Thank you. It means everything in the world to me. Every time that somebody that likes, shares, and comments on our social media, to coming to our webinars, to opening our emails, to obviously coming to our conference. We can't exist without that, and hope that you find the content that we're creating for you to be valuable. Any of you want to be on a webinar, any of you want to talk about being on a Facebook Live, you let us know. We're a platform that takes in people that are contributors, that want to contribute content to the community that we've built. We will end up, yes, so Chuck, I did record this. We're going to make this available as soon as we possibly can for public consumption. All of you have cool. All right, we're good. We're out. Have a good weekend, everybody. We'll see you.